This river is drying up, revealing something underneath that proves what many ancient texts have predicted thousands of years ago. The Euphrates River is in the Middle East, running through Turkey, Syria, and Iraq, and also happened to be the main source of water in Mesopotamia, where the ancient Sumerians originated from, who are one of the earliest known civilizations ever and believed to have descended from the Anunnaki, but I'll save that for another video. The Sumerians left behind thousands of clay tablets like these that they recorded their lives on in a writing system called cuneiform, where they talked about things like beings coming down from the sky and bringing the gift of civilization to humankind, but don't worry, another time. So you could imagine the area around the Euphrates River is rich in ancient archaeological artifacts. Well, it's drying up fast. Experts say it may be completely dry by 2040. What's scary is that they're finding ancient cities, castles, gold, man-made caves carved into the rock that have been under the river for thousands of years. The reason that's so scary is because this exact river drying up was actually predicted in ancient religious texts like the Bible. Revelation 16:12 reads, "The sixth angel poured out his bowl on the great river Euphrates, and its water was dried up to prepare the way for the kings from the east." And then Revelation 9:14-15 says, "Release the four angels who are bound at the great river Euphrates." So the four angels who have been prepared for the hour, the day, the month, and the year were released to kill a third of mankind. So the river dries up, containing four fallen angels that are released to destroy a third of the world. Nice. And it doesn't end there. Even the Quran mentions this river, saying, "The hour will not come to pass before the river Euphrates dries up to unveil the mountain of gold for which people will fight. 99 out of 100 will die in the fighting, and every man amongst them will say, 'Perhaps I may be the only one to remain alive.'" Different, but kinda similar-ish idea. Now, I'm not here to get into a religious debate. My point here is that ancient historical texts written hundreds, if not thousands of years ago, do talk about the Euphrates drying as a significant event, leading to the wide-scale destruction of humanity. Man, these videos have been dark lately. Ancient relics like those found in the dried river hold immense value to historians as well as religious scholars and groups, like the Dead Sea Scrolls back in 1947, where a group of teenage shepherds came across a bunch of old clay jars in some caves along the Dead Sea. The clay jars were filled with old tattered up scrolls with Greek and Hebrew writing on them, which turned out to be some of the oldest recovered written records of biblical text ever, over 2,000 years old, containing both exact excerpts from the Bible as it currently stands and uncovering entirely new, previously unheard of biblical writings like the Book of Enoch, which talks about some crazy stuff that went down. I can see why they took it out, but I'll also tell you all about that in another video. These scrolls were discovered in the Qumran caves in the Palestinian territory of the West Bank, a similar geographical region as the Euphrates River in 1947. And guess what happens just a year after these were discovered in 1948? Israel officially declares independence of their land, where they claim these scrolls were found. Good timing, right? For the next 10 years, they continue to uncover more and more scrolls in the area in an attempt to establish religious dominance over their history. More recently, in 2021, they found new Dead Sea Scrolls in caves south of the original location, over 60 years since the originals were found. Here's where it gets interesting. Along with these scrolls, further excavations revealed 4 2,000-year-old Roman-era swords in nearby caves, which are thought to have been stashed in these caves during the Bar Kokhba revolt, an armed Judean uprising against Rome in 132 AD. So, Roman-era remains can lead to archaeological discoveries of religious relics like the Dead Sea Scrolls, and possession of these relics equals a source of dominance among religious groups. Keep that in mind. Now, the real kicker, just a few months ago, an entire Roman-era cemetery with over 100 tombs was unearthed in a nearby region. Where exactly? Oh, interesting. In July to September of 2023, there was a surge of articles reporting this discovery with the number of tombs exceeding 100. And I wonder what happened there after September. Tombs of Roman aristocrats, which we've seen in the past, could be indicators of groundbreaking historical findings like the Dead Sea Scrolls. And the thing about religious groups, they all want to be the first to get their hands on these relics, like the Ark of the Covenant, for example, doing whatever they can to beat everyone else to those discoveries, no matter the cost. Hey, I'm not implying anything here, just stating historical facts. But it makes you wonder what might be under the Euphrates River as it continues to dry up, and whether these archaeological discoveries really will lead to humanity's demise, as stated in these historical religious texts, whether through some cataclysmic event or just us fighting over them. The most famous story in all of history is for some reason looked on as a made-up myth. Can we prove if the Great Flood actually happened? This is history. Shit happens. People, typically the victors, record what happens. Future generations read those records and accept them as fact. The more often a certain event gets recorded, especially among cultures that had no influence among each other, the more likely it is that it actually happened. Starting with the most popular book in the world, the Bible, with the story of Noah's Ark. The world gets flooded, and man is told by God to build a giant ship to save every animal on the planet and rebuild civilization from scratch. Hindu mythology has the story of Manu, who's warned of an impending worldwide flood, builds a boat to survive, and keeps humans from going extinct. Ancient Mesopotamia shares the Epic of Gilgamesh, which was allegedly written before the Bible, where a guy is told a global flood is coming, builds a vessel to save humanity. In Greek mythology, Zeus gets angry, floods the earth, Prometheus helps a man and his wife build a boat and restart civilization. Chinese legends have the Great Flood of Gun Yu. Mayans had the civilization population resetting flood of the god Huracan. The Incas from South America that predate the Mayans had the Unu Pachacuti, a great flood that wiped out a race of unruly people. Native American tribes all had their own versions of a great flood that cleansed the earth. Polynesian cultures have the story of Niu'u, who built an ark and sea gods flooding the earth, among many other similar tales. African cultures have a variety of flood myths with the same thematic elements. Even Aboriginal Australians have legends like the Bundaba flood with the exact same story arc, all of which end with select chosen ones surviving the flood and rebuilding society on Earth. Dude, these stories of floods are obviously just made-up myths that all coincidentally share the same plot. If they were real, they'd be in my history textbook. We're not allowed to question history, bro. We obviously already know everything. Well, it's a good thing they didn't just find an archaeological site in the shape of a massive ship in a similar location and age as some of the recorded flood stories. Oh wait, they did. Uncovered in Turkey. 3D scans done on site revealed a man-made structure beneath, with remains of wood in the shape of a boat and measurements similar to that of the flood myths, along with fossilized rivets and petrified deck timber, materials typically only used to build boats. Then you have countless places around the world with geological evidence of immense flooding hundreds of times more powerful than any water flow we've ever witnessed. You've got the Kamas Prairie in Idaho, the Dry Falls Formation in Washington, and Dry Creek in Montana have landscapes that were carved with water flows 10 to 20 times greater than every single river on Earth combined. Intense water erosion around the Sphinx in Egypt. The Sahara Desert is filled with these ripples, potentially indicative of colossal, widespread flooding. Same with Warburton Creek in Australia, which has even got salt deposits. Geologists found evidence of intense flooding along the Yellow River in China. Aerial scans reveal monumental flood progression throughout all of South America. Fossils of fish found as high as the Himalayan mountains, all of which has only become visible to us within the last 100 years through technology like satellites. So maybe historians are just too stubborn to rewrite their books after clinging to them for so long. This all leads to what is called the Younger Dryas Impact Theory, a proposed global event that caused significant shifts in human culture around 11,000 BC. I mean, it's clearly not 100% proven, just speculation with a mountain of evidence, which is in a sense what all of history is. None of us were there when any of this happened, so we have to look at historic records, archaeology, and geological evidence and make rational conclusions from that. But you Google debunkers, feel free to stitch this into your own little debunking video, because I invite all perspectives on every topic. The question remains, why would they even want to hide historic discoveries like this? I don't know about you, but I feel like the idea of an inevitable civilization resetting global cataclysm wouldn't sit well with anyone and likely cause worldwide anarchy. Even billionaire John D. Rockefeller, who funded the General Education Board in 1903, is infamously quoted as saying, "I don't want a nation of thinkers, I want a nation of workers." So when you have countless retellings of the same story spanning multiple cultures around the world who never made contact with each other, archaeological evidence that may or may not be remnants of artifacts from these stories, and geological patterns that align with the events that took place in these stories, it's obviously just a myth. Yet not a single record of the Egyptians actually building the pyramids themselves, easily the greatest achievement of their civilization. And somehow that's a historical fact, but this isn't. What do I know? I'm just a dumb online misinformation theorist, right? I prefer to quote Einstein instead. Education is not the learning of facts, but the training of the mind to think. I thought this was fake, but they actually did it. They might have found the most famous ancient artifact in all of history. For the longest time, historians dismissed it as a myth, a made-up story glamorizing one of humanity's greatest moments. And now, CIA documents from 1988 reveal the Ark of the Covenant is real, and they know exactly where it is. Known as Project Sunstreak, where they sent over 30 agents on very special missions to find the Ark without telling them what they were looking for or even where they were going. Just that they were looking for something very important in order to make the operation as unbiased as possible. The three major goals for this project were: establish whether a threat exists, if so, what are its dimensions, and can it be exploited. One particular agent on this mission, number 32, described finding almost exactly what they were looking for. He reported seeing a container with another container inside of it, made of wood, gold, and silver, and was shaped like a coffin, decorated with seraphim on top, which are these things. This already very accurately describes the Ark of the Covenant, without even knowing it's what he was looking for. But it doesn't end there. He goes on to confirm that he found this container hidden underground in the Middle East as he heard people speaking in Arabic around him. According to him, the container's purpose is to bring people together, holding information and historical knowledge far beyond anything we know, and that it's protected by powerful entities in this underground Middle Eastern chamber, also seeing domed roofs on the surrounding buildings. Keep that part in mind. The agent explained that this box can only be opened by those authorized to do so, and that it won't be opened until the time is right. Anyone who opens it before then will be destroyed by an unknown power. power, all in his official CIA report. Everything he described are known characteristics of the Lost Ark, without even knowing what he was looking at. And the reason he didn't know where he was or what he was trying to find was because this was a remote viewing mission the CIA had sent him on. In case you didn't know, the CIA was kinda obsessed with remote viewing in the 70s and 80s, part of their larger Project Stargate program. Put simply, remote viewing is the ability to project your consciousness to other parts of the world, or even outside of our world and at any point in time, to see exactly what would be there if you were to go in person, also known as astral projection. Kinda like when you die in a video game and you're waiting to respawn, you can fly around and see everything as that invisible camera that no one else can see. Now I know when most people hear this, they immediately call it nonsense voodoo psychic magic that has no merit in reality. But it kinda works. The CIA and similar agencies have successfully used it on numerous occasions with incredible results. Like Patricia Mona, who successfully found 30 missing people for the RCMP in Canada through her remote viewing sessions. Joe McGonigal, a decorated intelligence officer, described seeing the construction of a giant Soviet submarine through his sessions. An idea that was mocked and literally laughed at the time until they actually found it, and it matched exactly how Joe described it. Other remote viewers drew accurate sketches of secret Soviet bases, which later turned out to be real, or found the exact locations of hostages during major events like the Red Brigade and the Israeli hostage crisis, which were then rescued. Angela Ford was tasked with finding a fugitive on the run through remote viewing and found the name of the exact city he was hiding in Wyoming. He was there and they caught him. Former President Jimmy Carter himself admits they got the exact coordinates of a crashed plane in Africa from a remote viewer, and lo and behold, it was there. Not to mention the CIA invested hundreds of millions of dollars into Project Stargate before they shut this program down in 1995. Sure, you can argue that even a broken clock is right twice a day, and if you remote view enough times, yes, eventually you'll get something right. But these were all incredibly detailed events, locations, and descriptions, and it would be a stretch to call them all just coincidences. It's not perfect, but it works a lot of the time. These training programs insisted that remote viewing is a skill that anyone can learn if you put in the effort. There are some people who are more naturally gifted than others, and these are who they select for their missions. The way the CIA typically conducted the remote viewing missions is by providing anonymous coordinates to their psychic agents and telling them to project themselves there to see what they find. And as we saw with remote viewer number 32 of Project Sunstreak, he potentially witnessed the most sought-after relic in all of history, the Ark of the Covenant. A biblical artifact whose existence is hotly debated, but we do kinda know exactly what it looks like. A giant chest adorned with gold and acacia wood, 2.5 cubits long by 1.5 cubits wide, that is said to hold the 2 stone tablets of the 10 Commandments, the 10 rules of living as written by God and given to Moses in the Bible, as well as Aaron's rod, Moses' brother and the first high priest, which is said to have its own source of divine power, and a golden pot of manna, the divine white flaky food given to the Israelites in the desert by God in order to keep them fed. The book of Exodus goes into crazy detail about the exact specifications of the Ark, and we can pretty much construct a perfect replica based on all the written measurements and instructions given. The Bible even describes the exact sequence of events of where the Ark was moved throughout the generations. Over hundreds of years, the Ark was carried by the Israelites throughout the land as God directed them where to go. It eventually ended up at the Temple of King Solomon in Jerusalem, the last known location of the Ark before the temple was destroyed by the Babylonians in 587 BC. But remember our remote viewer number 32, when describing the Ark, mentioned seeing buildings with domed roofs in his report? Well, the most famous dome in the Middle East and arguably the world is the Dome of the Rock in Jerusalem, an Islamic mosque built in the 7th century AD. What's interesting about the Dome of the Rock is that it was built on Temple Mount, one of the holiest sites in the world, and the same original location as King Solomon's temple before it was destroyed, the last known location of the Ark. That's because the Dome of the Rock was built on top of something called the foundation stone, a massive stone block of great significance, as it's believed this is where God's creation of earth started according to religious tradition, and is also the rock upon which the Ark was expected to be placed on in the OG Temple of King Solomon, as if it couldn't get any more obvious. Beneath this stone are several known tunnels and chambers called the Well of Souls, which people have visited and very clearly exist. But beneath that well is another hidden chamber that's sealed off and is where the Ark of the Covenant is rumored to be held. Access to the Dome of the Rock is very heavily restricted, and you also have to be Muslim to enter, as it is an Islamic mosque, sparking further rumors that they're intentionally hiding it there and not letting anyone claim it for religious dominance. But hey, I'm not touching that one. We're not starting a holy war over here. But it is very interesting to see this remote viewer describe what appears to be the Ark of the Covenant sitting in a dark cave in the Middle East surrounded by domed buildings, without even knowing what it was he was looking for. So either call it a coincidence, or they know exactly where the Ark is and who knows what sort of powers it holds. Archaeological evidence confirms the Bible once again. We had Noah's Ark in Turkey, CIA documents found the Ark of the Covenant, AI verified the Shroud of Turin, and now this. In a remote corner of the Dead Sea, something buried for thousands of years is rearing its head, and it's low-key shocking the world. Once dismissed by skeptics as a myth, now standing tall as a pillar of salt are the remnants of the haunting biblical tale of Lot's wife. And the proof that this is the actual pillar from the book of Genesis is slowly becoming undeniable. Now, to the casual, uninformed observer, this column of salt might seem kinda unimpressive, a peculiar geological formation at best. To really understand the significance of what was discovered here, you kinda need to know the story behind it. It starts with a man named Abraham, who's kinda like the OG granddaddy of all major world religions, his descendants forming the family tree of prophets and significant people in the Bible. Well, one day, God tells Abraham that these cities of Sodom and Gomorrah were becoming super evil and corrupt, indulging in idolatry, gluttony, promiscuous immoral behavior, murder, theft, power abuses, pride, and mocking behavior. Basically, modern-day Los Angeles. And yes, if you add a Y to the end of Sodom, that's where that word comes from. So God lets Abraham know that he's going to destroy these cities, raining fire and brimstone on them and burning them to the ground. Abraham thinks it's a great idea, and he's totally on board, except for the fact that his nephew Lot lives there, and turns out he's actually a pretty good guy. Now, God's already 2 steps ahead and lets him know that Lot and his family are actually like the only good people that live there, so he'll keep them safe. He sends down 2 angels that tell Lot to get his family out of the city before God burns it down. And so Lot, his wife, and his daughters flee the city, and God starts raining down literal fire on Sodom and Gomorrah, destroying them and everyone living there. While Lot and his family are leaving, the angels let them know that God also told them to not look back at the burning city. That's their only rule. But Lot's wife is all like, I could take a peek, can't I? Turns around to look at the city and is instantly turned into a pillar of salt, while Lot and his daughters take refuge in a cave. That's the story. Leaving Lot's wife frozen in time, with many assuming this to be merely a symbolic story cautioning against longing for a sinful past. But now it seems like we might have real-world evidence that proves it actually happened. The tale of Sodom and Gomorrah is one of a sudden catastrophe so intense it decimated entire populations overnight, and the biblically accurate locations of these cities are said to have been somewhere close to the Dead Sea. For centuries, religious pilgrims from around the world sought to find the remains of the city, claiming it to be hidden deep beneath the layers of salt found at what is known today as Mount Sodom by the Dead Sea, named after the original city. But more recently, forensic scientists and archaeologists began excavating more around the area, and after digging and testing many mineral layers, they uncovered evidence of extreme heat in the soil layers deep beneath, as well as naturally occurring sulfur balls and burned sediment layers that could not be explained with natural erosion alone, but rather something that would only happen with a sudden onset of intense heat, and there aren't any volcanoes or anything that could cause that in this region, which points to a sudden source of destructive heat that may have fallen from the sky. There are also many unexpected, strange voids and air pockets beneath the surface of Mount Sodom, where it appears that the ground had rapidly collapsed, leading many to believe this actually is the original location of the ancient city of Sodom. And this wouldn't even be the first time that something like this happened. Many ancient cities from the Bible, initially dismissed as mythical sites, have all been found one by one. Cities like Jericho, Hazor, and Nineveh, all mentioned in the Bible, have been discovered hundreds or even thousands of years after they were originally written about. Now, to think all those cities were found and turned out to be real, yet Sodom and Gomorrah were for some reason made up, seems unreasonable. Because right at the edge of Mount Sodom, overlooking towards where the original cities of Sodom and Gomorrah would have been destroyed, a group of researchers found this, an unusual pillar composed of 80% salt, which is exactly what they are claiming to be Lot's wife. And all the evidence they gathered so far sorta proves just that. Found at the southeastern end of the Dead Sea, exactly where Lot and his family would have been fleeing in the region of Zoar. At first glance, it's easy to dismiss as just a mildly interesting geological formation, but further scans revealed internal cavities in the pillar with traces of carbonized organic material, something that had once been alive. Also embedded in the salt near the torso were threads of mineralized fabric sealed beneath crystallized layers. Close. Radiocarbon dating of nearby sediment placed the surrounding ash layer at roughly 3,700 years old, exactly the time window scholars associate with the destruction of Sodom. The lab from Jerusalem also confirmed that within the salt pillar were traces of fossilized collagen, a protein only found in organic tissue, which was also verified by multiple other independent labs. And the only way anything like that could have been preserved in a shape like this is through an event that involved extreme heat and a flash explosion, all evidence that highly supports this claim. Naturally, there's a lot of skepticism around this, with geologists claiming that salt formations like these are actually quite common, despite there being none other of this nature in the region. Also noting that it's about 20 meters high, much too tall for a woman, and for all we know, Lot's wife wasn't a giant. But then again, the story does say she was turned into a pillar of salt, not a statue of salt. It could very well be the case that the formed pillar was much taller than her encased in it, with the researchers behind this find even quoted as saying, "We found something that matches the story more closely than we thought was possible. A skeptic mineralogist from Oxford University admitted that whether this actually is Lot's wife or not, it is something the geological world has never documented before. Yet there actually are historic records of this beyond just the Bible as well. Josephus, a 1st century historian, recorded in his work The Antiquities of the Jews that he had seen Lot's wife with his own eyes, writing, "But Lot's wife, continually turning back to view the city as she went from it, was changed into a pillar of salt, for I have seen it, and it remains at this day." An old manuscript from a museum in Italy also writes about a lone figure in the shape of a woman overlooking a destroyed city, with its location being almost exactly where this pillar was found. Historic accounts made thousands of years after the original event, which sort of supports that it might have actually happened. Now, government agencies, the Israeli Antiquities Authority, scientific institutions, and religious organizations alike are all calling for further investigation of the salt pillar, or at the very least, building a preservation dome around it to protect it from the elements, and ideally get more definitive proof of what this really is. But knowing them, they're probably just going to close the area off from the public and deny further investigation, insisting it's to preserve it from damage. They just can't let us have nice things, now can they?